Hey everyone, welcome. I tried to be really enthusiastic there and it worked. Back to the Lui Diaz Podcast. Today is a day that you could say I've been waiting thousands of miles for. Cam Williams, who's actually here with me live in Melbourne, like a dream. Welcome back.
The sequel and face-to-face. Thank you so much, Louis. I absolutely loved our chat and I tell a lot of people about it back when I was in Costa Rica, and of course gone a long way since, and now we actually get to sit here across from each other, so no, stoked. Thank you.
Yeah, well, honestly, it's something I've been looking forward to since we last recorded, and I've got to come clean with the audience, okay? I'm going to come clean with everyone right here, right now. In some ways, maybe I'm not a man of my word, because I said that I was going to be on a leg of the bike adventure with you, and I haven't kept my word. Firstly, probably because I'm not organised enough, clearly, and secondly, because I started a new job and it was going to be too hard to take time off. So, yeah.
I'd say that's not a problem. Like, what
So
I'm
many
doing...
excuses,
and
no good reasons, though.
That's okay. You don't need a small reason, still a good reason. Such as work, such as a lot of other things in life. Like something that I talk to a lot of times about, to people about this, is that in order for it to go ahead for me, and it's now been pretty much 2 years on the dot, in order for me to kind of disappear more or less from normal everyday responsibilities and do this, there's a lot of, I don't know if sacrifice is the right word, but there's a lot of compromise in terms of the other ways that you are pulled in normal everyday life. The obvious things, like where you live and relationships, and then a lot of the smaller things as well. And that's to say that there's tremendous value in both. And the reason why it is a difficult decision to drop everything and disappear is because, sure, there is a lot of value in the trip, of course, and I'm very much enjoying it, but there is tremendous value in being at home, in the regularity of routine and being close to family and friends, and that's been difficult for me, and is why I'm very excited to be back in Australia and 2 months to go until I'm back in Perth for good. So, in a sense, whether you said in the last podcast that you'll jump on the bike, and now we can absolutely still go for a burn around Melbourne. It just may not be a big multi-day stint, but we can certainly still do a local jaunt.
Which
exactly, that's right. 1 hour is the cutoff to be an official backseat partner. But no, it's not to say that you've made a bad decision or one that's without value or anything like that. It's just life isn't quite as simple and a straightforward path for any of us to make these decisions, and you've still made a totally valid and valuable decision. So yeah,
Thank you.
It's not something to be sorry about.
I appreciate that. Why don't you bring everyone up to speed? Anyone that doesn't know you, didn't listen to the episode 27 because they just maybe started following now, give us the synopsis.
Yeah, so my name's Cam, 31 years old, from Australia. For about 8 years ago, come up with the idea of really wanting to ride a bicycle from the northernmost road accessible point in North America to the southernmost road accessible point in South America, which is a distance of about 30,000 Ks. Yeah, it's a good chunk. I'm pretty much right on 30,000 at this point here in Melbourne.
My God.
Now, that was all meant to happen in 2020, and then with it being delayed from COVID, a really beautiful silver lining that came from that is deciding to do it on a tandem bicycle, 2-person bike, and to carry everything required for 2 people, tents and sets of cooking gear and everything, and then just try and invite people to jump on the bike as we go. So that's really been the special secret sauce, is just getting to know people who would otherwise be strangers in a very kind of beautiful and intimate way.
Yeah, for anyone else that wants to dive deeper on all the why and the how, I guess you could go back and listen to episode 27. It's still one of my faves. I was actually listening to it the other day. I was like, I'm going to catch up with Cam again, and we're going to talk, and I've got to make sure that we don't cover the same things. But maybe also remember what we covered and what was, what we felt like were good insights, and maybe rehash those for anyone, that enjoyed that part, like I did. And we were talking about, and which is why I named the episode after something you said, the value of kindness.
Yeah.
And, when we first spoke, you were in Costa Rica and you were pretty much halfway through the adventure. And, you had all these positive things to say and stories of challenging times and maybe bad decisions, trying to go up the Rockies at the end of fall. But, you were generally pretty positive.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, he's only halfway through. Anything could happen. And I'd love to know, did anything change for you during that time? Was it only just more life affirming, or, did you go, aha, maybe the good part of the trip's over?
Yes, so from Costa Rica onwards, really from kind of Central America onwards down through South America, if you consider the ebbs and flows of life with the high points and the low points, kind of working like a normal pattern in the ocean or something, and kind of represent what had been up to that point and everything that followed, what followed really got stretched up and down. The highs were higher. There were really beautiful, genuine, amazing experiences that were just some of the most memorable came thereafter. And the lows were deeper as well. And when I say lows, we can, break that down a little bit, because I think the mind originally hears lows and thinks of kind of crises of conscience or things like that. And it was, sure, there was some internal stuff, but a lot of big external struggles. The bike breaking a lot, really different, really difficult landscape going through. The Peruvian mountains were just as difficult as they were awe-inspiring. So they were one of the highlights of the whole trip, but my gosh, did they really push me and the bike to the brink. So yes, everything really got kind of just hit multiply by 2 on the ups and the downs. And as for my general mindset about the trip, I suppose if the highs and lows were both exacerbated, the average remained in the same place. And I'd say that remains true of my mindset about the whole trip, which is that I still remained really just enthralled with the idea of picking up strangers, getting to know them very well over a period of time, of riding together, trying to be as flexible as possible about that, and just really being very appreciative of that opportunity to be able to do that, and reached Ushuaia down the bottom of South America at time of recording roughly a month and a half ago, which was the end goal. And that was a very emotional and very kind of confusing time to arrive at the culmination of a 21-month-long journey. And even though I am still on the bike here in Australia with another 4,000 Ks to ride, this very much feels like the epilogue. This is rather than a continuation of the journey. The journey feels over, and now I'm just on a fairly extended ride home.
Yeah. Just riding home from work.
Exactly. That's right.
5,000 kilometres. Yeah. No, it's a good way of looking at it. But there was one point where I was actually worried about you. I had tried texting you a little bit, and you weren't responding anymore, which I thought was, unusual. I'd usually give you a couple of days, but I was getting nothing, for weeks. And then I went onto your website and I looked at your little tracker, because you had a live updated, location on your website. And I went there and I saw that you were in Santiago, Chile, or something like that for a while. And I thought, okay, give him a few weeks. Maybe he's busy. And I went back to your tracker and it still said that you were in Santiago. And I was like, there's no way he'd sit somewhere for a month.
Yeah.
And I'm like, maybe he's dead. That's actually what went through my mind.
Wow.
And I'm sorry, but I was like, he's not replying. Someone's got his phone. His tracker has just bugged out. This is bad. So you know what I did? I texted Lucy.
I know. And Lucy texted me.
What did she say? Was she like, he's worried about you?
Yeah, it was very conversational. She said, hey, how are you doing? She asked me a couple of questions about some kind of logistical thing, and she goes, oh, by the way, I got a message from Louis and he's very concerned. I think you should touch base with him. And that's when I thought, oh boy, I've been a very slack mate here. So no, I very much apologise.
No, that was a dick move from me when I think about it. Hey, why don't you text the woman that's currently setting a world record by walking the length of the earth to find out if she knows where the guy who's riding from north to south on a 10 bike is okay. From the comfort of my own home here in Melbourne.
Well, it works, if it, they say if it sounds stupid but it works, then it's not stupid. So there you go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. When you put it that way, it's pretty full on. Yeah. So, okay, we left you in Costa Rica. Apparently at the time you had 3 months worth of partners left, and you thought it was going to take you about 9 months to finish. So that would have meant at the time of recording our last episode together, you were going to spend 2/3 of your time alone. And you talk about being alone in the last episode, and you talk about that it's gives you an opportunity to reflect, and that you can't run away from your thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
But talk to me about, did it remain the same plan? Did you have a lot of time on your own?
Yeah, so from Costa Rica onwards, at a point actually, it might have been around Costa Rica or a little before or thereafter, I had riding partners lined up for the entirety of South America. From the moment I arrived on the continent into Nicocli, Colombia, I would essentially pick up one person, ride with them for a period of time, drop them off, and at that point where they dropped off, another person would get on, and we'd be tag teaming, kind of handing the baton all the way down to Ushuaia. And then what wound up happening in practice is that a lot of those plans turned out to be very difficult for one reason or another, which I'll get into in a moment. And then in practice, I was on my own for by far the majority of South America. Now, that's not inherently a bad thing. And what was most difficult about that is not that I was on my own, because I feel fairly comfortable cycling on my own and in that headspace, but it was simply the logistical challenge of having a lot of people plan to meet up with me at various stages, and then a lot of the realities of life making it exceedingly difficult for one reason or another. And that's exactly what you spoke to earlier at the start of this podcast. That
I feel like mine's less genuine than other people's.
No, it's just as genuine and just as valid.
It's true, but still.
That's right. Now, so to give you some examples, being on the tandem, on the bike, you do your best to give accurate ETAs for when you'll be in a place, but there is only so much accuracy that you're able to give or to fulfill on. And then in the end, it's very easy for me to arrive, or let me say this a different way, for there to be a location where I've arranged to meet someone, and then all of a sudden they've flown in, they've dropped everything in their life to fly over and meet me, and I'm still 800 kilometres away.
Right.
You know, I haven't reached there in time for one reason or another. It was never through lack of effort, but it was often I couldn't manage to make it to the place where they'd booked to fly into, but we still made it work every time, right? It was just a logistical challenge of people needing to just accept that inherent in this whole thing is an aspect of required flexibility, of being able to jump on a bus and come out and meet somewhere. And all of those little wiggles often resulted in quite a lot of sections on their own. For example, my first riding partner, Jack, was in Nicocli, Colombia for a few days before I arrived there. That was just after I said goodbye to you in Costa Rica. Then my next riding partner, Katie, booked her airline ticket months in advance. And then I got delayed. I got robbed twice by guys on motorbikes, which was a real low light during that period. That was very difficult. And then in the end, Katie jumped on a bus and came out to meet me. So those are some examples of where simply the realities of life can make the idealistic nature of this trip difficult. You always make it work, and certainly, to clarify, not ghosting anyone, but it's always, there are quite a lot of difficult aspects. But now I'll get to something that really caused a little bit more time on my own and was most difficult in terms of the worry about letting down people who had come over. Is in Lima, Peru, I'd arranged to meet up with a guy also named Lui, different Lui. Every time I talk to my family or friends about Lui, they'd go, "Oh, Lui the podcast guy." I'm like, "No, not Lui the podcast guy, different Lui." And so Lui came and met me in Lima, and he'd taken 5.5 weeks off to come and meet me and ride all the way up to Cusco, Peru, and then across to La Paz, Bolivia, which is quite a long distance and arguably some of the most difficult terrain of the whole thing. Lots of climbs from sea level up to 4,000 metres, down to 1,000 metres, up to 5,000, and so on and so on. But then, during this period, I really learnt about the limitations of the bike, because Lui, wonderful, beautiful man, we had such a great time together, but a reality of life with Lui is that the guy is a monster. He is a very tall guy.
Right.
And monster's not the right word, but he is exceedingly tall. And as a result,
seat adjust?
Yeah, seat adjust. We fit on the bike fine, but within 2 days, big bike breakdown. Okay, so we wait, we fix, we keep cycling 2 days more up into the mountains. Massive bike breakdown in the mountains at this point. A lot of the screws inside the internally geared rear hub sheared off, and at that point, riding became really difficult because we simply weren't able to safely ride on the bike with our weight. So prepared it one last time, bust ahead, and we kind of crossed our fingers, hoped to die. Maybe that's not the best expression in this context. Crossed our fingers, hoped to ride. And once again, the bike broke because we were simply too heavy. And so in the end, we had this big 5-week ride together planned, and we only got a few days because we discovered that the bike simply couldn't take that load. So we booked another plan, which is that Lui would buy his own bike in Cusco. I'd meet him there, and then we'd ride together about 800 kilometers to La Paz, Bolivia. And then, of course, another reality of life came along. That he got very sick during that time. He got COVID quite badly. And so in the end, there was a lot of aspects where the nature of the life that we live was incompatible with the idealistic nature of let's just jump on and get going. So there was certainly a lot of periods on my own, but what was really nice is that even when it got difficult with a lot of these periods, like with Louis, the bike breaking, later on with a girl named Mallory through Chile, similar deal, that we still always managed to find the silver linings, find the beauty and the authenticity in those situations where even though we might be stuck, that we're able to find an alternative plan. Because at the end of the day, we're not traveling together because we want to ride. You know, the bike is a means to an end of seeing a location in a really genuine and beautiful way. And you can still do that without the bike. Once you're together, the bike is simply a vehicle. And I don't mean that in the literal sense, but it's a way of accessing those types of experiences. Exactly, that's right. But as is hiking, as is just any form of traveling together, even by bus, you don't need to be doing a big physically taxing experience to get these genuine moments. So despite a lot of the kilometres on the bike technically being on my own, with a lot of those riding partners who were with me during that time, we still found the experience, found the way of finding those moments and that connection, even when the bike didn't work, that we could make it work. And that it was still, all that magic didn't go anywhere. The magic of the prior riding partners where everything worked well, that it was still there. It just wasn't through the avenue of a piece of metal with two wheels, but instead the legs underneath us, or just other forms of traveling or just spending time and getting to know each other.
Yeah, still the same Cam I spoke to in Costa Rica.
That's right, there you go. So like I said, the highs were higher, the lows were lower, but the average, it's still me, still very much the same outlook, I'm happy to say.
What happens if you leave a town, or like if you can't contact someone?
Yeah, like when I had my phone pinched, that was a really good example of like...
Exactly, there you go.
So
you couldn't meet someone if you didn't know where to find each other.
And that's exactly what was happening. So I
accidentally ghosted. That's kind of what
that's okay, I understand. So yeah, in that example, riding through the south of Colombia, and even though I'm about to talk about a story of robbery, don't let that colour any perceptions of Colombia. It was such a beautiful country, not just in terms of the physical nature, but the people there, my gosh, they were so hospitable and just really beautiful and friendly. But anyway, every place will have experiences where it, doesn't turn out so well. And in this case, cycling along the road and had a motorbike cut me off, grabbed my phone, my wallet, my camera, my sandals. Could you believe it? They took my bloody sandals, which feels like the most funny of all of this. But anyway, and then only 1 week later, I was meant to meet up with Katie. And so Katie was trying to get a hold of me, and I managed to kind of, through talking to someone, to message someone else, got hold of her, and then it was just this kind of logistical nightmare of like, in 4.5 days from now at 2 p.m. I'll meet you at this location, and we need to be there because I have no means of talking to you otherwise, but we'll make it work. I'll see you there. Let's go. And then, there were certainly many challenges that come from the nature of how we communicate in the modern world, but, the foundations are still there. We can always still make it work, even if there are a few roadblocks in the way.
Yeah. And your guest book.
Yeah.
It had some extra beautiful words.
It does, and I'll be happy to show it to you. I wish I brought it with me, actually. That would have been a banging idea.
I was thinking I should text Cam and say, hey, can you bring the guest book? And then I thought, no, maybe it's got some things in there that you're waiting to release, as a book or something. Maybe you won't want to share it. I don't know why I didn't ask.
No, that's okay. That's all right.
I was going to ask you to bring the bike.
Oh, there we go.
I want to see this famous bike, but yeah.
So
the bike needs a rest by the sounds.
It does, and thankfully I've been in Melbourne for a week now, and it has received a very much needed rest. A bit of R&R, visits to some wonderful bike shops that you've got here in Melbourne. So bike is very nice and relaxed right now, which is good because 2 days from now I'll be getting out on the road with my next partner, Nathan. In fact, I've got riding partners booked for the whole way from here to Perth, which I am very aware of the fact that in Costa Rica I might have been saying, I've got riding partners booked all the way to Ushuaia, and now look what happens. So big tentative grain of salt, a fistful of salt to say, do have riding partners booked, but it's only 4 people. And I think with less people for longer legs that the odds be in our favour. And so we got one guy, Nathan, haven't met him yet. I meet him on departure day on Monday morning. We'll go from Melbourne to Mount Gambier. Then a different guy named Ted, who I have met also from here in Melbourne.
Ted?
Yeah. Comes out to meet me in Mount Gambier, buses out.
Ted's an old school name.
It is an old school name. He's a young bloke though,
Hey,
currently
Ted.
attending university, doing a master's.
Ted, you listening?
So him and I will go Mount Gambier to Adelaide together over about 5 days. Then a girl named Rosie joins me in Adelaide. She's just flown into Melbourne 2 days ago, but she'll be in Adelaide come that time. We'll go the very long leg across the Nullarbor, across into Western Australia, ending in Albany.
Yeah,
If Rosie follows through with doing all of that, she will hold the record for being the longest, both time and kilometre count, on the bike, which is 2,700 Ks, to overtake Declan's current 1,653.
Smashing that. She just smashed that.
Absolutely smashed. That's right. Closer to double. And then finally my best mate at home named West goes from Albany up to Perth, up to Fremantle. Yeah. And then in mid-July, July 13th, I think it should be all over, arriving back home. Exactly.
It's 2 more months.
Yeah, and it's winter as well. Do you remember last time I was on this podcast, towards the end, I was saying, if there is a flaw in my planning, I keep getting myself in cold weather without sufficient preparation.
Yeah, but imagine like riding through summer everywhere as well.
I know, but
That'd
thankfully...
be brutal.
Would you believe it? There are these other 2 seasons that are neither summer nor winter.
Yeah, exactly. They're on either side.
Exactly. Who would have thunk it? But nevertheless, I'm a slave to my programming, which I believe I said back then. If I can biff up the planning and end up in riding through miserable conditions in winter, then so be it in my blood to end up in that situation. So Rosie will be toughing across the Nullarbor with me into headwinds as well, westerlies through that section. And then up from Albany, up into Perth in winter. But nevertheless, a little bit of adversity to finish off feels like a nice little bit of...
Woo! We got some public speaking happening here.
Exactly. We've got many
hecklers.
Fellow interviewees,
Was
hecklers.
that a heckler?
That's exactly what it was.
No, it was a fan. It was a support.
I suppose the heckling / support is in the eye of the beholder here. They could be a heckler or a supporter.
That's the interesting part about choosing public locations to record. It's just could be anything happening. There was an ambulance here earlier.
Oh, right.
There's people taking photos of us, asking us to sign release forms. It's been interesting. Been interesting. But you were saying...
Yes.
And you were talking about the last legs and being full all the way.
Yeah, exactly, across to Australia. So, should be about 2 months left to go. And then comes a whole new mindset, a whole new change in life as to returning to the beats of everyday life that we all know well. And a lot of my family and friends, because of course my initial goal was always Alaska to Argentina, always Prudhoe Bay to Ushuaia specifically. And now I've kind of added this additional part on, going over to Perth. A lot of my family and friends have kind of thought, okay, so when you arrive in Perth, you'll find another reason to keep going. You'll tack a little on. And what's interesting is that I know with certainty in my soul that that's not the case. I'm very excited to return to the rhythm of everyday life. Now, I talked to you a little while ago, Louis, about the podcasting dilemma of finding interviewees. And here we are. We got them coming out our ears.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Solomon is in any state to be giving an interview, though.
No.
I think he's somewhat intoxicated.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And, wow. Well, thanks for bearing with me through that. This is, like I said...
This is fun. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah. I've never seen this much action in this alleyway, I swear.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's been pretty low-key the last few times I've been here, but today it's a little reckless.
Yeah.
We had to dodge some uncomfortable potential situations before, and thank you. And I'm sure that's a great segue into you having to dodge some uncomfortable, reckless situations.
Yeah.
I mean... You mentioned that you were robbed a couple of times in the south of Colombia. You make your journey sound like such a beautiful experience. And you rarely ever talk about the downside of it. Yeah. You mention it.
Yeah.
You definitely mention it, but you don't talk about it much. And I think you've always been the type of person that would rather focus on the positive because you see so much of it.
Yeah. I'd say a little to the contrary of that. I definitely try and focus on the authenticity and the slight difference, I suppose. And I suppose I'm referring to telling the story through videography, which I still have a whole lot of further work to do to tell the rest of it. But I enjoy telling the lowlights and the lowlights as they... Or I'll put this another way. I enjoy telling the trip authentically to how I experienced it. So for any particular section, if I felt, say, melancholy or alone or really physically stressed, that is in line with how I tell the story as well. So,
Okay.
yeah, there has certainly been, like if I think of when I last spoke to you, that was in Central America. In hindsight, I think Central America was one of the lowlights of the trip.
Really?
And I know that is a generalization, and I don't want to cast any ideas that aren't true, but only in my experience of riding through heat and humidity that felt very intense. The riding through that condition, yeah, I mean, you can do it. You know, you sweat, you work, but you get there. What I did not expect is how difficult it would be to camp every night in those conditions and just feel like a little hot box every night inside this kind of oven of a tent. And as a good example of that, a lot of nights I'd leave a tent completely open and unzipped and unflied, knowing that I would get completely munched by mosquitoes all night long, but just to get that little bit of extra airflow was worth it. So it was really, that was a really difficult period. When you spoke to me in Costa Rica, it was during this lovely respite when I'd been coming down from sea level for a long time, struggling in that. But then when I spoke to you, I'd gone up into the mountains to meet Lucy, so it was much drier, much physically more enjoyable. But then following that, crossing the Darien Gap was a really interesting challenge as well, a really beautiful challenge too. So for any listeners that aren't aware, North and South America as continents are linked by land, but not quite linked by road. The road network in Panama runs down and eventually terminate at the area of this big kind of forest national park area called the Darien Gap, I suppose. I was trying to think of province or area, but yeah, Darien Gap. And then the next country to the south, being Colombia, has a road network that goes up and terminates also at the Darien Gap. And the distance between these terminating roads is not much. It's only something like 200 kilometres. Getting through that, though, is very, very difficult and dangerous, and not to be advised without doing a lot of preparation, a lot of application to the various border control forces in that area. Of course, our mutual friend Lucy did do it, but I don't know of many other people at all who have done it. Of course, there are thousands of people migrating across there, which is a really kind of tragic and dangerous process for them to be doing in their journey north. But to do it legally is a very difficult process. Anyway, so for me to get around it, of course, there's the option of flying around it. But taking the bike on an aeroplane kind of felt a little like cheating. Initially, I looked into the possibility of pushing my bike through the Darien Gap, but quickly realised that it's about as dangerous and inadvisable as you can get. And then the midpoint between these felt like I will find a way to get it there via boats with locals. So cycled to this tiny little fishing village named Puerto de Carti, and in Carti I went there and asked around, hi, I know that most of these fishermen and locals are going directly north to go to the San Blas Islands. Is there any chance any of you could take me southeast towards Colombia? And I thought I'd find someone in a day or two, so I only brought a day or two's worth of food. Really bung decision on my part in hindsight, because I wound up camping at the dock for 5 days looking for a boat, eating just a little bit of white rice every day, and it wasn't the most pleasant experience. But where it all turned for me was finding that boat that eventually took me down, and it was so stunning because this whole area of the Darien Gap has an island chain running on the eastern side of it. And there is a lot of indigenous people and groups that live on this island chain, and the only form of communication and transportation that they have with the outside world is through the boats that come and go. And so while taking this kind of string of boats with locals from Puerto de Carti in Panama down to Necoclí in Colombia, that was 5 boat rides in total. And on a lot of these boat rides, we were stopping by islands, and we'd have someone on the boat who would meet up with someone from one of these islands in a small dugout canoe, meaning literally just a log that has had the inside burrowed out, and then someone has paddled out to meet them. And so they jump in the canoe and then paddle off. And other times we'd arrive at one island, and everyone there, or I would assume everyone, it certainly felt like the entire group, would leave the village and come down and celebrate on the beach, and we'd drop them off a bit of food. So it was a really special and genuine experience. It was really beautiful to just just feel like I was in the beating heart of this culture. And even though, I got to interact with some locals, not a lot. I stayed with the captain and his family for a night, which was really special, and I think the most authentic aspect of actually meeting the people that live there. And then by the time I arrived in Nakokli, I'd had an experience over the last 2 days, something that I was really dreading in the lead up to, thinking that Darien Gap is so associated with danger that this would be very difficult. And in the end, it was one of the most beautiful parts of the whole thing, just feeling really just like a fly on the wall in a really beautiful ecosystem of life in the indigenous cultures that are living in this area.
Oh man, what an insane experience.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, again, I think I said this last time, so much more than a bike ride.
Yeah, that's the idea. Yeah,
so much more.
Yeah, it's funny to meet up sometimes when I'll, because of course a big part of this for me is finding people for the back seat.
Of course.
And
it's like having a podcast.
Exactly, that's right. I should do the same that you're doing. Just bring my bike into a crowded alleyway and just wait for folks. Exactly. Yeah. But just like your problem, you can find interviewees. Can you find anyone who is who you would hope to interview? Different challenge. And same thing with me, finding people.
Sitting in front of one right now.
Well, thank you. But yes, and sometimes what I was getting at with regards to your comments, so much more than a bike ride, sometimes I have people who are very into the cycling community asking to ride with me. And some of my favourite experiences have been with these people, but the connection is never the cycling. It's simply all about the connection just between two people. And so every now and again, someone will reach out to join, and the emphasis for them is very much on the cycling. And I'm always kind of very cautious to let them know, like, of course, we are traveling by bike. That is implicit in this. But it's not why I'm doing this. The bike, as we said earlier, is a medium. It's how this experience comes to be, rather than wanting to simply spend time on a bicycle. It's spending time in the environment, and the bike is just the right vehicle for that.
No, it's interesting you say that, and echoing your sentiments from last time, of course, there. But also, I'm keen to hear more about the landscape as well, because you did mention the mountains in Peru earlier, and then I thought, oh God, imagine riding through Chile.
Yeah.
You know, that'd be some beautiful moments.
Okay, so I'll give you a bit of a rundown of the geography as I experienced it. So first off, the countries I entered into after speaking with you through Panama. Then the order was Colombia, Ecuador. Next was Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, Chile, Argentina. Now, in that time, starting with Colombia, really beautiful, lovely experience with Jack, and just got a little bit of an intro taste to the mountains. And I remember riding up some of the mountains there and thinking, oh boy, this is tough. And now I look at that in hindsight, I'm like, oh boy, Cam, you had no idea what was ahead of you. That's just a little bit of salt and pepper before the extravagant meal that is the Andes to the south. Continuing down through Ecuador, at this point, it's getting, just in terms of the geography, more beautiful and more difficult. A lot of the uphills are much more prolonged, are much steeper as well, which is something I really come to appreciate about the next country down being Peru, which is that no matter how much uphill you had to ride, it was always at this beautiful 4% gradient, which I know is a bit of a technical term, but it just means it's a nice uphill. It's pleasurable, it's easy. On the exact opposite side of that is Guatemala. If I was to put together all the bike pushing I've ever done in my entire life, it would be less than just how much I had to push my bike up hills in Guatemala. It felt like you are just hiking up the cliffs of Mount Doom. Often it was a very difficult experience.
Yeah.
So continuing down through Ecuador, really beautiful experience through Ecuador. I spent 3 weeks riding with a girl named Katie, who I mentioned earlier, who actually went to the same high school as me. I never met her in high school. She was many years beneath me. Many years younger, that is to say, and had a lovely experience with her, met up with some other locals who we all continued with together. We got ourselves stuck into some tracks that the tandem had no business being on. Tried to ride a route called Los Tres Volcans, meaning the three volcanoes, through Ecuador. And I mean, that is a difficult route on a mountain bike, let alone a 250 kilogram tandem bike.
Right.
Yeah, we spent
250 kilos,
including riders. So if we minus the riders, it's about 75 to 80 kilograms, depending on how much food and water I have on board.
Sure, but then you've got two
and
riders.
then I've got, assuming me, someone else my size, roughly around there. So then continuing into Peru at that point. Now, Peru is very interesting geographically. As I went down through Peru, I really got a sense that, to really oversimplify, you've got the Peruvian coastline and then you've got everywhere else. Because the Peruvian coastline is very flat. There's a lot of beauty in the sand dunes and the way that sand has covered a lot of mountains near the coastline, but it's generally quite flat. But then the rest of the country, as soon as you go just a little bit inland, 10 k's inland even, you are straight in the mountains. And the rest of the country, all the way inland, right up to the borders with the countries to the east, is just these insanely beautiful, like the most beautiful sights I've seen in my life. I think are pretty safe to say many of them would reside in the Peruvian mountains. But often it was incredibly difficult progress through there, not for any crazy reason aside from the fact that it's a 75 kilo bike. I was usually on my own, and you're climbing from, say, sea level to the top of a hill, and the top of that hill might be twice the size of Mount Kosciuszko in Australia, our tallest peak, 2,228 metres.
Yeah. Is that a hill?
It's
a hill.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the tallest in Australia, and then you're riding up to elevations that are literally more than double that, and that's just one uphill, and then you go back down that and back up again, and it was quite funny getting up to altitudes where you can feel the hypoxia, meaning the low oxygen levels in your brain, resulting in impaired decision making. One day I remember standing outside a tienda.
I don't need to be at high altitude to experience impaired decision.
That's
just going to call that out to our audience.
A very natural skill there you have.
Yeah, I have that.
That's right.
I have that.
Well, if you ever want to take it to the next level, all you need to do, jump on a bicycle, get cracking up a big hill in Peru. And I stood outside a tienda one day thinking for about 15 minutes, do I want to walk inside and get a chocolate bar? And after like 15 minutes of indecision, I remember thinking, this isn't normal. I'm never this indecisive.
15 minutes.
Yeah, I don't know.
Over
Something
a
along
chocolate
those
bar.
lines. Exactly.
Wow.
So
yeah.
it was a very odd feeling.
That is impaired.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And so, continuing down through Peru, very slow progress. A lot of the biggest bike problems happen through there as well. But boy, was it pretty. Then onwards into Bolivia. At this point, you're up on an area called the Altiplano. And the Altiplano is, imagine taking a desert, so a dead flat area with hardly any elevation change, just lots of red and yellow dirt. But then taking it up from, you would think of a desert and just naturally assume sea level, and put that desert up at 4,100 metres. So the entire area of this altiplano, you break down the language there, alti sounds like altitude, right? High
Alti,
up, and then
plano,
flat.
Plain.
Okay, exactly, that's right.
High plain.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, I'm
That's
following.
Right. There we go.
Hopefully everyone else is.
So at this point, some of these distances through the Altiplano I didn't go through the most extreme areas of desert. There are a lot of other cyclists who can claim much bigger kudos than me in terms of really pushing themselves into the remote areas of the Altiplano. But nevertheless, that was just such a change, coming from the mountains of Peru, where sometimes I'd be on the bike for, say, 10 hours in a day and cover 23 kilometres, and now I'd be on the bike for 8 hours and do 160 kilometres. So it was just a complete change in mindset. Really beautiful culture through Peru, through Bolivia, then entering down into Argentina. And at this point, it's easy to kind of lump the culture of a continent to be much more ubiquitous than it really is. And that was very true going from Bolivia into Argentina, when all of a sudden it feels like going from a culture that is very grounded in the indigenous or traditional cultures from that area, referring to Peru and Bolivia, down into Argentina that I hope this doesn't annoy any Argentinians, but it really feels kind of like entering Europe or a first world country that we might kind of know.
People say that about Argentina.
Yeah, that's right. And it was beautiful, like wineries and just very lovely. And all of a sudden it's just kind of this, just like a light switch of change. And this is not referring to, there's nothing here that is referring to one as being better over the other in any way, but it was just this big unexpected change. And following our Ruta 40 to the south, and this is around when you were messaging me, and I had a month of one of the biggest rushes of my life, because I've tried to return home for every Christmas. Just having a touchstone of, no matter how long this thing winds up being, I know that in mid-December I get to go home and see the people I love.
Yeah, right.
And so at this point it was now mid-November. I had 1 month until the flight, and I still had 3,100 kilometres until reaching Santiago, where I was going to fly out from, which means averaging about 100 kilometres a day, assuming 0 rest days. And it was just this massive push to try and do as much distance as I could to try and make it to Santiago in time. And there's a really kind of beautiful and interesting thing that you can, if you kind of believe in fate or cosmic forces, which I'll admit I don't really, but anyway, I still think there's wisdom to be drawn from this, is that I needed the bike to hold together. I was in a race to catch this flight, to come home, and I really needed the bike to not have some of the problems that it had had over the prior month or two. So go, find a few backseat partners. I arrived to Santiago, no exaggeration, 14 hours before the flight departs. So I just squeak in, just by the skin of my teeth, and that was only possible because the bike did not fall apart. It held together for those 3,000 kilometres. Now, I go home, I return home for 3 weeks, have a lovely time. Fly back into Santiago in mid-January, get a message from Lucy, finally respond to my good friend Louis. Again, I apologise. But then I arrive back into Santiago in mid-January, and I start cycling. Less than 5 kilometres into my very first ride back into Santiago, everything falls to pieces. The bottom bracket snaps in half. The crank arm falls off. The tyres start exploding because the tyre will not stay on the rim anymore. It's snapped off. And all of a sudden, all these problems arise. And it just feels like this beautiful cosmic coincidence that, in hindsight, during that rush through Argentina, it felt like the bike was going great. But really, it was just holding on, and it feels like if that thing was sentient, that it knew, I've got to get him there. He needs to get there. Finally arrived there, and then the bike says, okay then, brush my hands at this guy. It's time for me to relax, and then it fell to pieces. So it stunned me to how it held up when I needed it to. Flew back into Santiago, no exaggeration, for the first time in 10 months I had time on my side, I had spare days, and then all of a sudden it falls to pieces. That was it really floored me. And of course I managed to fix it, no big deal, but it delayed me a lot. And if one of those problems came up prior to that, I'm not going to be over dramatic and say I would have missed the flight. I probably would have made it work, but I would have had to skip ahead, and I've never had to skip ahead when riding's been an option. And so it was really nice to maintain that feeling of whenever the bike has been rideable, I've been able to cover this distance without the need to skip. So
if you haven't already, find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or TikTok, where you can catch additional content and grace us with your thoughts. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the episode.
So that's to Santiago. I'll just finish off this last bit about geography, which is to talk about one section of road that was so beautiful. So going south through Chile, think of the geography of southern Chile as like walking down the tip of a spear, in the sense that the country is getting skinnier and skinnier and skinnier as you go south. And so as you start getting towards the bottom, there is only a single road going south. It's called the Carretera Austral, and it's immensely beautiful. It's mostly unpaved, runs for about 2,500 k's, more or less, I can't quite remember. And it's the only road going south, and as it follows to the south, you have got these beautiful mountain ranges of glaciers on your left and right, lots of this wonderful clean water. It's just a great experience, and there are cycle tourists everywhere, just like flies, and so of course I'm amongst that. But then as you get down to the bottom of the Carretera Austral, the final 300 kilometres are a dead end, which is to say it's like a cul-de-sac. For 300 kilometres, if you're driving down, the only way out is to turn around and come back. But if you're on foot or if you're cycling, at the end of that dead end, there is a way through. And it's such an interesting process, because you arrive at the town at the end of this road. The town's name is Villa O'Higgins, and at that point there is a couple of small ferry companies. Don't think of a very big commercial ferry, just a couple of guys with boats that'll take you south, where you can jump on and they'll drop you off after about a 2-hour ride across a lake at a trailhead. This is just a little trailhead. For a lot of the time, it's skinnier than even just a single person can walk, so you can't even walk side by side. It's just a little trail through the bush, through the forest. It lasts for 20 kilometres, but here's the interesting part. Over the course of that 20 kilometres, you cross from Chile into Argentina. So during this little kind of trail through the forest, you come up to this shack, this little house with a Chilean border immigration person working there, who will ask you some questions, have a nice chit chat. Of course, the rule holds true that the more remote you are, the more relaxed the immigration process, and boy was that true here. That was just a lovely experience. Have a little chin wag, stamp your passport, onwards you go, and then you keep going and you arrive at another little shack by a beautiful lake on the Argentinian side, and he'll stamp you in. And it's fascinating. This is not a route that is open to any kind of motor vehicle transport, no motorbikes, no cars, because it's just a tiny route, but there is a way through. And then you arrive at that lake, another ferry will take you across the final journey, and then you are into Argentina, and you have 1,100 kilometres left until Ushuaia.
1,100.
Yeah, so it's very much towards the bottom. In the terms of percentages, you've got about 3% left in terms of the entire journey at that stage.
Yeah, you've already done 29,000 kilometres by that point, and there's this incredible gateway that symbolises the last 1,000 kilometres.
Absolutely. And that final 1,000, the final 1,000, just to stay on the topic of geography, that final 1,000 is very, very different to what precedes it. Immediately preceding that, I just talked about the Carretera Austral. You have mountains, you have glaciers, you have forest, and it's just so lush, so teeming with life, so kind of, it's very much what you imagine when you think of natural beauty. And then you cross over into Argentina. It is no less beautiful, but it's now a beauty in a lot of absence, because there are now these rolling plains, and I almost flat, but kind of just these rolling plains with bright yellow grass all throughout. And it's really kind of just like stepping into like a Dali painting or something, where all of a sudden it's so minimal. And what's more, in this section, the craziest winds I've experienced in my whole life. Winds. Not, so there's a D in there.
Yeah.
So we had one day, me and my riding partner at the time, a guy named Harry, we were going 40 kilometres an hour on the flats without even pedaling. We were just in in this amazing whoosh of a tailwind.
Whoa.
And what was great, I got a nice little bit of video of this. At one stage, Harry on the back, he unzips his jacket and holds it out to his sides like a sail.
That's what I do when I'm on the skateboard.
And it bloody well works.
It does.
Because all of a sudden we feel another, he catches more drag, more acceleration, and we pick up another 5k an hour. And it was just tremendously fun. And we were having the time of our lives, laughing and chuckling. And then the road ahead, what's it do? It 180s.
Oh, shit.
And then
Are you going backwards?
Exactly. And then we are struggling to reach 5 kilometres an hour. That's right. We are pedaling about the speed that you would walk on flat ground. It was, and all of a sudden our the yin to the yang appears. The highs, and I talked earlier about the incredible highs and the lows, the exaltation of riding with such speed and such winds with such little effort. Well, this is simply a matter of, what goes up must come down, and we battled into some headwind for a good long while. But
honestly, that hurts to hear.
Yeah, that's right.
I was hoping the story would end at the sail.
Exactly. Wouldn't you hope that we could sail all the way down to Ushuaia? And I am happy to report there was more tailwinds that followed. But no, it was certainly a big struggle in that time. And you mentioned the gates into Ushuaia, because finally arriving at the end, you go through Chile for a little bit again for 2 days in Chile, and then kind of do a loop down, ending in Ushuaia, the target city at the end. And then, so I arrived in Ushuaia on my 31st birthday, which was a very nice kind of very beautiful day for me, and arrived at the gates. At this point, I was on my own. Harry's...
It was recently in April, wasn't it? Your birthday?
It was March 26th, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not bad. Did I message you?
Yeah.
I hope I did.
We talked.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So to arrive there, and there's these two big, beautiful spires with the letters of Ushuaia. And prior to that, for a long time, for months, you could really say for the entire trip, I'd always wondered, what will my mentality be? What neurons will be firing upon reaching the end of a goal that has been spanning a couple of years? And
tears.
Yes. So arriving at the gates.
I was speaking for myself, but putting myself.
Safe assumption. Assumption. You're good.
Yeah.
So what really struck me is just seeing the word Ushuaia, manifested physical in front of my face, was incredibly emotional. And it was funny. I remember immediately before that being very in my own head and kind of being aware of this is the end, and kind of thinking of some of the logistics, I've got my camera rolling and blah, 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 and kind of talking to myself and whatever. And it kind of all feels like, I don't know if inauthentic's the word, but just very much thoughts and not feelings at that point. And then all of a sudden, around the corner, there's just this beacon of big vertical white letters spelling out Ushuaia. And it just felt like every aspect of thought that was there a moment ago, just all of a sudden it just fled. And it was no longer an intellectual moment. It was no longer cognitive. It just cut straight through to the heart, and I just felt so blank. And it was just a really beautiful moment. Stood there at the gates for quite a while, just taking it in. And then what's more, continued on, rode through the city. And at this point, the emotion of arrival gave way And I hope this doesn't sound anticlimactic, because there is a story that you'd hope to hear of exaltation and kind of, yeah, but the truth is that as I had passed through those gates and the letters were now behind me, what was there in kind of this really beautiful moment of arrival gave way not to further emotion, but to a real vague sense of kind of like unreality, because all of a sudden my life exists kind of in a new context, in the sense that for so long I've kind of based so much around my life about the fact that I'm going to ride from Prudhoe Bay to Ushuaia, and I'm now in Ushuaia, and it's kind of a real transition moment. I remember feeling similar at the end of high school, and many other people will be able to empathise with other points in their life when they've moved on. It might be from a relationship or from a really all-consuming point in their life and not really knowing what comes next. And I remember just feeling like, the way I like describing it is that all of a sudden the reality that I knew to be true no longer matched with what I felt to be true. And what I knew to be true is that the journey's over in a way. And I know I'm cycling across Australia, but the real goal is over. We've talked about this, yeah. So the goal is over. That's what I knew to be true. But what I felt to be true is that I'm going to camp. And the next morning, I'll wake up and I'll get on the bike and I'll cycle another 100 Ks and I'll stop for some lunch and I'll hopefully find someone for the back seat, because it's kind of like certain neurons in your brain are just firing every day for years, it's like water running over a stone. Those pathways become entrenched, and all of a sudden those deeply entrenched pathways no longer were required. And it was a very polarizing feeling, and it was like, truth be told, it was quite melancholy, and it was kind of like a bit of a feeling of loss. And that's not loss in a tragic sense. It's loss in kind of a beautiful sense of growth. It's when you know that whether you want it or not, that a new period in your life is beginning and a very cherished period is ending. And then it's up to you to find the beauty in that, to find the authenticity, and to move forward into whatever comes next in life. Not with necessarily positivity, because if you feel sad, then that's what you should be feeling. So it's not about moving on with positivity, but it's about moving forward with, I suppose, authenticity is the word that comes through, with accepting where you are and what you're feeling, and that that something unknown is to follow, and just being present in those moments. And to be honest with you, still I don't really know how I feel about being done. I think perhaps 2 months from now, when I'm in Perth, I will have a much more crystallized perception of what it is and what it has been and what I've gained from this. I remember spending 8 months cycling through Europe, and a lot of people ask me during that time, how have you changed? What have you learnt? How have you grown?
Changed?
And at the time, I had no idea. I kind of would say, I'd love to be able to tell you about all this growth, but I have no idea. And it was only in the months and years following that bike trip that I become cognizant of my growth in that time and how beneficial it had been to me in ways that I didn't realize for months or years. And I think it'll be the same. Right now, if you were to ask me about this trip, I can tell you so much about what it is, and I can tell you about what it means to others, but can I tell you about what it means to I can tell you, maybe I'm not finding the right words, because the truth is I can tell you about what it means to me. But can I tell you about how I have grown from this trip?
Yeah. That's what I want to know.
I don't know is the thing. And I think a big part of moving forward with authenticity is to accept the fact that a lot of wisdom does come in hindsight, and that right now I can speak to the beauty of the trip. I can speak to the meaning. But can I speak to when it is simply a memory in the past? What are the absolute distillations of, like, the nuggets of truth that come from that I hold most deeply, most at the core of who I am? I suppose that I have hunches, but truth is I know that it'll come in hindsight. And so I suppose that's an aspect of we talk about moving forward with acceptance, and I think that's something that I am trying to be very cognizant of now, that it's okay to not understand where you've landed mentally, how you're feeling about something, but just simply when the way is not clear, that you can continue through life and just trust that the clarity will come. Maybe it only comes in hindsight, maybe it just simply needs a bit more time to develop down the road. But in this case, it feels like I've put together a jigsaw puzzle, and the last two pieces are only accessible to me years after I've done the assembly of what came before.
Yeah, I mean, you've obviously thought this through, but also, what you're saying is a lot of what you're taking in the present doesn't necessarily make sense at the time, or doesn't need to. You don't need to derive any meaning from it, And it's good. It's a good thing that, any wisdom or learnings or insights that come from things come in hindsight.
Yeah.
It allows you to sort of enjoy the moment, maybe.
Yeah.
I'll figure it out later.
Exactly. And something else I think I'd speak to with that is that I always feel like I'm such I don't know if advocate's the right word because it's not a cause, but I'm always feel so vocal about just appreciating the power of our subconscious, of the things that we've learned but we don't really know yet, and how powerful our mind is in ways that we don't understand. When you think of gut feeling, that's a good example of things that you can't quite put into words, but you just kind of feel it and know it. And in this case, I think that's a good example of the lessons and the wisdom and the growth. It's all it's not that it doesn't exist yet. I think the way I like to visualize it is that it's kind of bubbling away in the subconscious, and then it's just like a big bowl of mixed up spaghetti, and then only with a bit of time can we kind of unpick that and find the clear threads and bring them from the subconscious into the conscious mind of knowing from this massive bowl of, for a very unromantic word, of just data, of just incoming information that I've had coming in for the last couple of years. How does this all distill down into a singular or a kind of distilled piece of very firmly held belief that kind of sits at your heart? And so I would say it's there. I just don't, you just don't know. It takes a while to sit on the back burner for a while.
The other thing that I was thinking is, like you said, you're not a big believer in fate.
Yeah.
But I think, how could you do a trip like this and not?
Yeah. I mean, this has been something I've thought about for a while, I suppose. This is something now that I maybe that there are people with much better insights than me, but you could derive this into the conversation of fate versus free will. And
the bike I mean, you described it as potentially sentient, because it just held up for you.
It did hold up.
That's
exactly
fate. Come on, man, that's fate. There's some divine interventions happening there.
Yeah, it's
nice to believe in.
It is beautiful to believe in. I think this is a bit of a harder sell, to kind of maybe to present my side of the belief. And I know this will sound very unromantic and whatever, and overly scientific perhaps, but I think people are very good at finding patterns and finding meaning, finding the order in the chaos, I suppose. And even if that order isn't inherently there, to kind of just see a lot of aspects in life and draw from it the meaning where otherwise there might just be chaos. And so I suppose I do take a fairly scientific approach to this in terms of simply just believing that the events that unfold are very much chaotic, and that we don't really and that we're just kind of like a leaf on the winds, more so than having any kind of, I don't know, cosmic insight or anything. But then we're
a leaf in the wind.
Exactly. And where the
candle
beauty
in the
from
wind, Elton John might say.
But where I think the beauty of this comes is that if you do feel, and this is not me trying to sell this perspective on anyone, I think that I wouldn't begrudge anyone who has alternative beliefs, but to kind of just believe that life very much is chaos, and there's not necessarily a lot of, I suppose a good phrase is things happen for a reason, and I often feel kind of in opposition to that things happen and then we find reason. And I think you can look at that in a bit of a negative way, to say that, a tragedy in your life isn't always something that happens for a reason and then results in growth. Tragedy can be tragedy, and growth can come from anything. But then finding, if to believe that things happen and then we find meaning in them, that there is still a beauty in that. There's still a romance in that, to be able to kind of, I think it's humbling. I think I really am always an advocate for really just viewing our perspective as just an itty-bitty part of a much bigger system that we have very little agency over, but then finding the beauty in what's around you, even if you are just kind of on these tides, that there is just so much authenticity and beauty that can come from that, even if there is no grand fate or plan or meaning. And I'm not sure if I can articulate it any better than that. I know there are certainly people that can do better than me at that, but I think regardless of what your philosophy is on this, if you are capable of moving through the world in a way that is open to authenticity and open to beauty, then the details don't matter. What's it matter? You know, if you're engaging with the world in a net positive way that really is making your heart sing, then who's to say that any one philosophy is better than another or more true?
No, of course. You know, it's our right to put our own spin on things. But, you know, I like to throw a romantic lens, you know, and you know, I think, yeah, I may have even referred to this episode during our chat. I can't remember, but during my chat in episode 25, I think it was, with Martin Grohovsky, he talks about the magic and believing in magic and some voodoo on pagan rituals and stuff that still exist in parts of the world that he visits. And he talks about that, you know, that's part of the beauty of life, is that those things exist, you know, and it's our choice whether to still, as a society, to hold those collective beliefs in voodoo and things like that. And it's something that makes life kind of just a little interesting, you know?
Exactly. That's right.
If you feel like you can, there's some chance or a roll of a dice that's happening in the background for or against you, you know, a tailwind, then a headwind, you know, like. Yeah. I just think it's, you know, this journey represents so much for me about, we talked about last time, and that's why I called the episode The Value of Kindness. And then I made this insight that you really appreciated at the time around the currency of kindness, right? Yeah. And that I think the analogy or the example was something along the lines of kindness isn't received in equal proportions as it's given, kind of thing. You know, like you'll give someone a bottle of water because you've got a spare one in the boot or in the cab of your truck, I think, which was your example. But to that person, like, they've been looking for water for miles and miles.
Exactly.
You know, so what they're receiving is something just so much greater than what you're actually giving. And kindness is always like that. It's always multiplied or exponential or whatever, however you want to put it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, and I completely agree with the sentiment entirely that as a currency, kindness is only ever amplified. To do an act of kindness to anybody, it will always be received as so much more than what was tangibly given. And I think a lot of this trip has just really had given me so much exposure to that. It's really just been 2 years of constantly receiving so much kindness from the people that inhabit this world around us, and doing my best to give it back. And having said that, I do very much feel like going home, I have a lot of karmic IOUs to give back to the world that has given so much to me over the last 2 years in terms of helping me out when things fall apart, and just really having so many people approach me with an open and empathetic heart that I look forward to going home and really doing my best to make good on continuing that flow of, you know, to speak of it technically, to keep that currency flowing, to you know, I've kind of got my pockets full right now, and then to distribute that elsewhere among the world, knowing that I didn't receive much, and that now I feel like I have a lot, and I don't need to give much tangibly in order for it to be received as a lot. And so it's it's a very humbling, incredibly beautiful experience to see that. And
wow, yeah, because you believe in karma so much, it's like it's your intention to go and fulfill it. I feel that's how I feel. I feel like, you know, you're going to set up a not-for-profit or something will happen along the line where, you know, giving is a part of your everyday life.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I would disagree. I would say I do not believe in karma, but that kind of the expression from earlier is just believing that, I don't like the word chaos, that sounds too negative, but that there is not a grand plan, there is what we make of the world around us. And that for me to have a lot of, as I said, karmic IOUs to hand back out into the world, I've certainly received a lot of good, and now it is in my hands to give it back out into the world. It is not a fate. I think karma would say that I've received good, and now that there is a opportunity or an inevitability for that to continue. And I'd say it's not inevitable. It's a choice that we make to do those things in life that fill our heart and really just fill the hearts of others even more, as we talked about that expansion of kindness as a currency. So yeah, I don't believe in fate, but I would still not begrudge the sentiment at all that I am going home with a tremendous opportunity in terms of insight and knowing just how much you can give to others with so little.
Yeah, it's a great message. You know, we all have choice every day. You know, if you take the romantic lens off fate, the idea of fate, and then sort of think about it just as an objective kind of thing, then you're potentially leading yourself into a life of a lack of intention, you know, because you're like, oh, whatever happened is meant to happen, it'll happen anyway, regardless of whether I make any effort or not. But, you know, your journey has really been one of great choice, a choice to spend a big chunk of your time, you know, that choice to do that happened a long time before it even begun, you know, and then there's the choices that you made along the way that, you know, have impacted your experience, and you've become conscious that every choice you make is going to have some kind of consequence, whether it's positive or not.
Yeah.
And that it's all on you. You're the common denominator. Yeah. It's a good way of looking at it, because it has as much positive potential as it has negative.
Exactly. It's quite an exposing feeling, I suppose, to kind of...
But it's the positive part of it that makes it worthwhile.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like taking the guardrails down in bowling. Like all of a sudden there's this potential for greatness and potential for failure. All you got to do is shoot straight down the middle.
That's true. The bumper bowling or whatever it's called. Yeah, you're right. Because when you get a strike, when you've got bumpers up, it's not the same as a strike without the bumpers.
That's exactly right.
Even if it didn't touch the sides.
That's right. They were there. And that's right. Even if you just know that they were there for you, that diminishes.
Your 30,000 kilometre bike ride has been likened to a game of 10-pin bowling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I suppose I've knocked 9 pins down now, and I just got to pull off the spare to get that last 10%.
Oh, the spare, the old spare. It's disappointing. Right. It doesn't suck when you leave one pin up.
Absolutely.
And I suppose, for you, it's kind of bittersweet. I suppose that the last part of your bike ride is in the country that you know probably best.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does feel like doing this through home is kind of like... the word that comes to mind is victory lap, but that's not quite right. It's kind of like...
Victory lap?
No, it's more like... It's kind of like putting on your favourite warm jacket. Because now it's very much... It's a headspace I know. It's environments I know. And even it's just been so easy to fill the back seat all the way over to Perth. And so it's kind of this just wonderful experience to say, I've put in the hard yards, for lack of a better word, to get down to Ushuaia. Now let's just kind of live for the enjoyment of it, rather than, because I think a lot of the trip had immense fulfillment, and I've thought about this a lot, about the value of about the conflicting value sometimes of fulfillment and happiness, that sometimes the things that make you most happy in life can be unfulfilling, and vice versa. The things that can be most fulfilling can really not often be the most happy, and I know that this may come off as negative, and I don't mean it to, but I think had I not done this trip, had I stayed at home and continued with life at home, I think my life would have been happier.
Really?
Yeah. But just hear me out, Louis. Hear me out. It would have been happier, but happiness isn't the tip of the iceberg. I think fulfillment is. And even though it might have been happier, it would have been nowhere near as fulfilling. And I'm simply talking about the aggregate here.
God.
About
you turn that around.
Oh, that's the point here, Louis. I'm not selling you a car without an engine, right?
Of course. You would never do that.
Okay? Because when you get granular, think of the day, right? You wake up, you get on the bike, you ride for a day, and a lot of those days are beautiful, but many of them are mundane, and many of them are without social connections, in spite of the idea of the tandem. And so your average day might not quite have the chemical firings of happiness that you might have at home, but even though it has been more difficult in some ways, it has been exponentially, I couldn't even put a number on it, more fulfilling. And to get to the Australia thing that we're talking about now, if we were to work on the hypothesis that the last 2 years has been about achieving fulfillment over happiness, or you could say happiness later in life and wisdom later in life through fulfillment now, then this Australia trip is to say, okay, let's now just have a bit of fun and just enjoy a nice ride in a place that I know with people I know. And, fulfillment is for me at the tip of the pyramid, but let's not sell happiness short. Let's enjoy some real happy times on the bike and then have a bit of a celebration in Fremantle upon arriving home.
Oh man, that's going to be a good party.
Yeah, I think so.
Damn. Should try and make it to that. I'm sure I'll find some excuse. I wonder if there's that street, the Cappuccino Strip. There's still some good pubs around there.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, so in South Freo, you've got South Terrace, which is kind of the main cafe strip with some nice pubs, cafes. That runs right up into central Fremantle. Beautiful area. I'll probably be finishing at South Beach with a few friends and family there to say hi. And a few people who have ridden the bike with me will be there, which is going to be pretty great. And then that will be the real kind of a really interesting time to kind of... I think there's a real beauty in knowing when something's at its end and to say goodbye to a period of your life and not try to hang on intensely to something that has given you immense fulfillment and happiness, and know that that is all true, but it is time to, the tides of life, if we're considering ourselves like a leaf on the breeze or like a stick in the ocean, if the tides are pulling another way, there's no use in fighting so hard to hang on to what was there and to just relinquish to being taken in a new direction. So I don't know what is there for me at that point. It will be a very interesting feeling to let go of a period of my life that has, I would say, kind of defined my whole adult life. I came up with this idea at age 24. I'm now 31. It kind of feels like that my adulthood has consisted of, I am the guy who is one day going to cycle a tandem bike from A to B. And so now that's over. It's the end of a chapter, and that's it is a bit scary, and but it's also, there's a real beauty in that and excitement in knowing that the closing of a chapter means the opening of another. Yeah, it's a chapter that you started intentionally and will end, having known that one day it was going to end. There are chapters in our lives that we have no idea are starting when they start. Yeah, and with no idea when they're going to end, and probably hope to God for some of them that they end soon, and for some people they hope those chapters never end. But with you, it was always a thing that you planned. Very much so. Yeah. I feel like I had a very crystallized idea at the start of this trip. I was going to say I knew what it was. That's not quite true. I didn't really know what the trip was at the start, but I knew, if nothing else, just in terms of the objective facts of it, I knew how long I wanted it to be, and I was open to the fact that that might change. But interestingly, as I did it, I confirmed for myself that the original idea, I was onto something. I set myself a goal and a time frame that feel now, in pretty much in hindsight, to have been the natural pace, the period of time, the duration, and the experience that I was really hoping for. Yeah, wow. Honestly, Cam, for me it's bittersweet that you're here, because I've only ever known you as the guy riding the bike through South America. And after our first chat, I was hoping that, it could last forever and I could live vicariously through you, and that you would just keep riding and that you would ride off into the sunset, and that would always be part of your life. But then here you are, in front of me, and I feel like that dream that I had for you. Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said a moment ago... You owe me, Cam, you owe me this. That's right. I said there's beauty in knowing when it's at its end and knowing there's a new chapter, and that's true from the brand, from the macro down to the micro, and micro in this case between yourself and I, that we currently have a friendship that's existed in the context of me being on this ride, you being in Melbourne, and touching base about that, and now we can look forward to seeing what comes next. Yeah. We're going to have something different to talk about. Yeah, that's right. The hell? What are we going to talk about? I'll interview you. No, I won't. I think you're the master of this. We'll find new things to talk about, I'm sure. Yeah, well, I know one thing for sure. Like, when you first started, until you were about halfway through, you were making short films. Yes. I guess a short series that you were putting together. Did you end up at episode 3 or 4? 3. So, yes, episode 1 covered the idea of the journey at home up to my first riding partner with Danny. Episode 2 down to Vancouver, Canada. Episode 3 down to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. And in spite of what you would think by looking at my output of videos, I am still very much doing the filmmaking. I'm still scripting, I'm still storyboarding, I'm still filming, and I'm really, really, really happy with the stories as I've told them on paper and on storyboard and in my mind in terms of how it will unfold. But the final piece is the assembly of the puzzle, is the edit. And if I was to have told the story up to this point, I would probably be here in Melbourne 6 months later, because the truth is, for as much as I enjoy the process of visual storytelling, it is quite a timely process. So my current plan is to arrive home and then really just keep that ball rolling. I've really got a plan that it will last for a further 4 episodes, episode 4, 5, 6 and 7, lasting down to the bottom of Ushuaia and then across Australia, and really looking forward to telling that story and seeing how that connects with people as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's destined to make like a film festival circuit or something. Surely, come on.
Yeah, I would love that. It will be an interesting challenge for me to condense a story that I will be telling over, say, 4 or 5 hours of filmmaking down to a 15-minute short for a film festival. But nevertheless, yeah, it's just one of the challenges I'll be tasked with over the next few months. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, have you thought about submitting to film festivals?
I have, yeah. I've got a bit of a plan as to what that condensation would look like, because condensation is the wrong word. You can't just shrink 5 hours of story into 15 minutes. You'd really have to. We talked earlier about there's a through line here. We talked about having a massive incoming information and really reaching deep into that to untangle those spaghetti noodles and draw out the nuggets of truth, the gems at the heart of a wealth of information. And that's the same thing here, to distill this trip to its core and find the narrative beauty at the core of it. And I think I've got a good idea of what that is. So that's what putting it together is certainly another challenge, but I have thought about that.
I guess you get started on that process pretty soon when you get
plan.
home.
Arrive home and then spend a few months really just leaning into the filmmaking. It's something that is purely a passion project for me. There's no monetary incentive, but I really just can't help but lean into the romantic idea of, it might not be the most sensible traditional life decision, but it is the passionate decision. And you could argue that the passionate decision's the right decision, the one that feels most true to your heart, and that's where I think I'll find myself.
There's the irrational in you. I knew you were balanced. I knew it would come eventually. Doesn't believe in fate or karma, but the passion, and
exactly. I've always been one to lead with the heart, I think, more so than the head, and I suppose this is a good example of that, to just, it might take you on a bit more of an erratic roller coaster than a logical, well-planned set of decision-making will. But in my case anyway, not for everyone, but in my case, it feels like what brings me fulfillment in life.
Oh, Cam. Yeah, this was honestly a bit of a trip to have you here in front of me, and talking about the end of the journey and talking about the impending end to the end.
Yeah.
It's... Yeah, I mean, what I was feeling? The recently I was feeling like really proud for you, that you made it. So many ways a journey like this can go wrong.
Yeah. Wrong
to the point where it doesn't finish. It doesn't end.
Yeah.
And I honestly, just feel very proud of the effort that you put in, the consistency, the determination to complete this.
Thank you so much, Louis. That really does mean a lot, and it's definitely been a very humbling experience. It's been a journey for me to get this far and to come here and meet you as well, and to finally put a face to the voice that I've so loved talking to over previous interviews. And it's a pleasure to be sitting here across from you. So really, just thank you for.
Cam, you've been awesome. Thanks so much for coming to meet me and doing this for a second time. I don't know. I'll have to pinch myself a little later. Did I just meet Cam, the guy I've been seeing on the screen for so long? But you've always been an advocate for the podcast as well, or a fan, or a supporter, all of the above.
Absolutely.
And for me, it's a real pleasure to continue this conversation and this friendship with you, and I'll continue watching like I always have. Don't make me worry again. Okay.
Fair call.
All right.
No, everything you say about me, Louis, is absolutely 100% true in the reverse as well. I know that I said this last time, but it's equally as true now. I was listening to your podcast on the walk over here today, and it's just so beautiful to hear such a genuine conversation with someone that is just so interested in the right, in what you would hope someone is interested in life. It really just looks through the surface of what someone is doing in their life to really discuss what is at their core, and I just so appreciate the way that you move through this world and engage with the people that you talk to.
Oh, thanks, Cam. Honestly, I really appreciate your friendship, and I guess we'll do this again sometime, yeah?
I'd love to.
All right, congrats.
Thank you, brother. Absolutely.
We'd love to know what you thought of that episode of the Lui Diaz Podcast. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and even TikTok to let us know. And be sure to follow, subscribe, and leave us a review on Spotify, where you can catch some of our other really great episodes. Thanks for listening, and catch you next time.